Good afternoon, everyone. We have a few people still joining us, so we'll get started in about a minute or two. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Schuler, Executive Director of AASA. We are thrilled to be with you all today for the first of a three-part series. We still have a couple of individuals that are still joining, so we're going to start officially the webinar in about another minute. Well, welcome everybody. Once again, I'm David Schuler, Executive Director of AASA, the Superintendents Association, and we're very excited to launch this three-part webinar series on generative AI, what it is and what it isn't. Our goal is to demystify AI and examine some issues and challenges and provide leadership for school system leaders. To that end, AASA has partnered with the Consortium for School Networking, COSN, which is the association supporting technology leaders in school districts. We will hear from Pete Just, former chair of the board of COSN, in just a few minutes. But right now, I'd like to welcome COSN Executive Director Keith Kruger to join us and say a few words. Keith?
Thanks, Dave. It's great to be here, and I can't think of a more timely topic or a better host with you and AASA to be here. I think we have, if you read the newspaper or watch the news, this is front and center in the mind of the moment. And, we need to look at the guardrails that we have to put to be responsible leaders in school systems. And we have to also understand the opportunities. And I know that you've got a great series planned, and we're really proud to be with you.
Thank you so much, Keith. We so appreciate our partnership with COSN. ASA is also partnering with ISTE and ASCD, the association that supports teacher leaders and district curriculum and assessment leaders. And we'll hear from Joseph Self, the Chief Learning Officer at ISTE. This series is also being produced in partnership with Digital Promise and Collegiate EduNation. We are all interested in helping educational leaders learn and grow with us as we unpack what AI is and what IA is not. So let's start with Pete Just, the Indiana CTO Council, provide what generative AI is not, and what CTO's point of view is regarding AI and what they should be thinking about. Pete, thanks for joining us today. You're a valued and trusted colleague, former superintendent or former CTO, COO of Wayne Township, where I got to witness a lot of your work. You did incredible things over there, and we're really excited for you in this new role. So I'd love to turn it over to you for your thoughts and perspectives.
Thanks, David. This should be a lot of fun, I think. Obviously, those who are here today understand the importance of it, and I'm sure we'll share it with their colleagues. I'm sure none of you have been living under a rock, so we have been hearing about this for a while. Some of this may be basic for some of you, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page as we kind of move forward. I speak to this obviously as a recent former CTO, but also from the perspective of an educator, a lifelong public school educator. So obviously what happened to us not too long ago was we had a big significant sea change. We were pretty used to, I guess what I might say, the first generation of shift with the internet and some of the aspects of AI that were just really young at that point in time, maybe 10 years ago. And we're pretty used to Google searches leading to hyperlinks, and even, became talented at searching through and past all of the different sponsored ads and things like that that helps Google to be able to fund this type of search. But what happened at the end of November, most of us kind of saw it at the end of semester, let's say, as perhaps we were getting out of finals, and we realized that, oh my gosh, there's something out there. Students may have cheated. They may have had some of their essays written by this new tool. It actually creates plausible answers, not just a search result. And so this is what I would call the second wave of AI. We're all pretty familiar with what I might call the first wave, where Google starts to fill out information as we're writing an email or doing a search, knowing that the first three words probably lead to the fourth or the fifth word. That was sort of a guessing type of a game that the AI was playing at the time. But we're in a different place right now. At COSIN in 2020, we wrote an artificial intelligence brief. It happened to come out in March, so no one really paid attention because something else really important was happening at the time. And so we just recently have rewritten that in 2023. And we defined at the time artificial intelligence as something that performed human intelligence tasks leveraging complex data sets. We're learning a lot more about how that works, large language models and things like that, but we see a lot of opportunity. So I want to talk today a little bit about what opportunities look like, what AI is and what it isn't. Really, I think it's a new place to start for everything, to put it in a nutshell. But let's go back to ChatGPT, because that was the thing that really blew the whistle, if you will, on what generative AI is. Many districts immediately blocked it. You've probably followed the news. Back then, New York City schools and several others blocked it immediately. It just so happened that New York City is a large district, and they got into the news pretty quickly about that. If you've been watching the news recently, they announced their program to dig into this more deeply, unblocking it in some ways. But there's a good reason to consider blocking it. When it first came out, terms of use said you needed to be 18. Then they changed it to be something more like what we're familiar with a lot of digital resources online. It was at least 13. And if you're under 18, you have to have parent or guardian legal permission. We're pretty familiar with that type of a way of putting terms of use. But privacy policy still indicates that they are collecting information. But that's just ChatGPT specifically. The conversation we're having is a bit bigger than that. It really is about what GPT is, but also its cousins, I guess you might say. So what's the GPT stand for? It stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, which basically is a type of neural network that's been around in some simplistic form since the 70s. So it's not brand new. As a matter of fact, it's been used in industry for a decade or so. This particular product, GPT, is relatively new, but still a couple of years old. Generative AI has been around for a while, which is the idea that something can be generated that's novel, I guess we'll say, from a large language model. So it's a large language model. Large language models are models that are and algorithms that are trained on a really large set of data, let's say the entire internet. And when we're talking about training it, we're talking about kind of letting it know the information that that data set knows, like, so let's say the internet, or let's say a medical database or a financial database. This can then provide some degree of prediction as to what you're wanting as you put in natural language. So this is all based on text. So natural language, you enter your prompt by text, so you're typing it in, and then it gives you a result, an answer, if you will. And that's also in text. Of course, we know that generative AI comes in other forms. It can give you an answer in a picture. If it's an image generator, it can even give you an answer in a movie if it's a video generator. But these are all very similar in that they are based on a neural network, pulling information from large data sets, answering the questions that are being asked. So one of the things we learn as educators is it's really important to be able to ask good questions. Well, doesn't that sound familiar? As a biology teacher, I can appreciate that. So let's change some terms around a little bit. ChatGPT is what we've kind of been talking a lot about. That's the water cooler conversation. So it's generative AI, and there's a lot of other products out there today. I'll share some with you towards the end. There are over 250 companies developing different tools. There's a link later. You'll get these links after this, I believe. But a lot of people are working on this. A lot of money is being put into this. This is, like I said, a sea change that is going to be specific to K-12. And there are many products that are being developed today and are starting to come out today. I'll show a couple of examples here in a second. So when we're talking about this, rather than talking about just ChatGPT, I think it's wise to talk about it as generative AI or GAI, as some would call it. So when we think about that, what can't it do? Well, because it's basically, let's call it a computer brain, a neural network, and it's basically trained on certain pieces of data, that defines its limitations. So it often can't understand context. Matter of fact, if you look at ChatGPT's terms of use and all that information, it will say, a lot of times we don't know what you're asking, so we'll take our best guess, right? So it doesn't understand context. You have to provide that for it. If you don't, you're going to get some weird answer. And it also has a tendency to sometimes give weird answers, which is kind of like a delusional hallucination. They call them hallucinations. So these wrong answers sometimes are spurred by bad questions, but sometimes they're just the system itself confuses itself on the data sets that it's reviewing, and it will make things up. You may have seen just recently, like 2 days ago, I think a lawyer got in trouble because he was using it to cite legal sources that ChatGPT was making up. And so he got in a bit of trouble for that and in regard to his brief. So think about what it can't do well. It doesn't replace human creativity very well because it's just generating things that it's been programmed on. Doesn't have a lot of novel ideas. Creativity, we've always talked about, that's an important thing to teach. It's something America is known for. It doesn't recognize abstract concepts. If you're talking something humorous, something ironic, it might not keep up with you. So let's think about then what that means to us as educators, as K-12 leaders. Well, I think there's a lot of opportunities coming. That's definitely what it is. It's definitely an opportunity. It's going to be a disruptor. Already has happened, I think, in many cases. If I was, in this last month, teaching my biology class, I'd probably have asked some different types of questions on anything that was open book. I might have asked it backwards, if you will. So maybe using a tool like this for AP Bio, which of course those are seniors, juniors typically, they should be able to access this. And you might ask it to ask the chatbot and then prove if the chatbot is right or wrong, because we know sometimes they're wrong, right? So that might be a different way to do these types of assumptions, those types of assignments. So the best way to think of it, though, it will be a disruptor, but I would also think of it as an augmenter, an assistant, an aid for whoever is using it. And I would hope that that would be us. So there are concerns, there are reasons that we might want to ban this if we don't understand what it's doing from a perspective of student data privacy. We need to understand that before we say yes. This is no different than any other online tool. I know one of the things that frustrates chief technology officers is when things get adopted without us being able to check it out, especially when it comes to fitting into our ecosystem, which this isn't that much of a problem with, but also in terms of student data privacy. Agreements ideally should be in place. You're probably not going to get that with Microsoft or Google, but as you work with other companies. So when we talk about banning, though, we're only talking about not letting it work on our network, not letting it work on our devices. So as you think that through, that's a bit of a problem. If you ban it, you're only banning those students who depend only on your network. You're not banning it from students who can get to it at home, in the coffee shop around the corner from where they happen to live. And you start seeing a bit of a problem in terms of digital equity and access. And this is a problem that we can create if we just ban everything. Because again, what we're doing is we're keeping it off our network, keeping it off our devices. And for students, like many of mine, in the past, they're just not going to be able to get that resource. Others will. And so that's a concern and a consideration that we have to have. It's not something we can just blanket say, well, we're just not going to use it, because I guarantee you, your students, your parents, they will use it if they have access. So we have to consider access. I'll tell you, ChatGPT and other products are mostly built for commercial space. They're not built for K-12, but the huge conversation that's happened over the last 5 to 6 months definitely has many dev teams thinking about K-12 as they're developing products. And many have already come out with products. Here's a good way to think about generative AI. This is from someone at Stanford that I heard say this. I thought it was brilliant. It's going to replace some jobs, but for the most part, it's definitely going to replace the jobs of those who never use it. And I guess that includes all of us who are on this call today. So a little bit of a wake-up call. We need to be thinking about how we can use this tool. So it's definitely going to disrupt, but again, it could also be used as a great disruptor. If we think back as educators on the things we've always wanted to do and never had the means to accomplish, generative AI can accomplish some of those things for us in an amazing way. Not in 5 years, but today. Definitely in the next year. So we already need to be thinking about how we can use these tools, and we need to become familiar with these tools. So when we think about that, personalized learning is a huge opportunity that AI can be leveraged to accomplish. Many products are being created right now to help us with this. I knew, this is something critical that we often don't have time for. We can't invest in it like we would like to. There's also amazing tutoring systems where students can be one-on-one. I'll talk about one of these in a second here, where they're getting real-time feedback as they need it. Again, we can't clone ourselves. We can't clone our teachers. But in a way, we can, especially if they have oversight and insight into these tutoring conversations that this AI can have with the students. And then also, I've spent a good chunk of the last part of my career creating data analytics tools with visualizations to let me see, different types of things to help identify students in need of services or students that are, needing to have additional help, or, just overall progress of a school or a district. There are many of the tools that are going to come out that are going to help us with these things. So
Hey, can I just jump in and ask a question or offer that, get your reaction to it? I've said that I believe generative AI has the potential to really meet every student in their proximal zone of development and then allow for the acceleration of their learning to take place. Because if an individual, a student gets 1 to 11 wrong, why are we asking them to do 13 to 53? Yep. And likewise, if a kid gets 1 to 11 right, why are we asking them to do 11 to 53? And what generative AI has the potential to do if used well, I think, and so I'm asking you as the expert, to really create a personalized instructional program that can meet the student exactly where they're at. And if we can do that, it should accelerate their learning as we move forward, rather than pushing beyond where they're at or teaching them something they already know. Any reaction to that?
Unequivocally, yes. That's exactly what it does. You did a brilliant job explaining that, David. It's exactly what its potential is. Now the question is, who's going to come out with that product? We have something in our mind, right? And who is going to be able to develop that? And then, honestly, what does that cost? Because right now ChatGPT is free, but did you know that ChatGPT, if you use a search on that costs 23 times more than a Google search. Who's paying for that? Well, probably Microsoft. They gave them $10 billion. And it's in Bing, right? But at some point, that's us. At some point, we have to have a line item, or there's going to have to be some kind of a trade-off. One of the observations I made at a recent conference was that Microsoft and others were starting to talk a lot about taking all that processing power that's in the cloud and pushing it down to the user. Well, that's fine for me on this desktop setup I have. That doesn't work for Chromebooks. So there's a big implication if that comes to pass, right? So yeah, it's definitely got implications that are huge and awesome. You said that very well in terms of how it could be leveraged, much like people in marketing and advertising and drug development and other areas have utilized it but someone has to come to market with the product, and then we have to understand, how do we fund that, and then does it run on everything we have? So these are some of the questions that continue to be open.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to interrupt. And for our attendees, if you have additional questions, Diane, I'll get to yours after Pete and Joseph do their presentations. If you have other questions, please put them in the chat and I'll monitor those. So Pete, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. Well, so I think that, to your point, David, it's going to provide a lot of opportunity for innovation and education. It's already doing this for businesses. I was listening to a venture capitalist yesterday, and he was talking about all of his future investments are moving towards companies that are leveraging AI. And the reason for that is because these companies are becoming the innovators of today. When you think about the advent of the internet, we didn't have Google, we didn't have even Tesla. These are some of the biggest companies in the world today, Alphabet, and the parent company of Google. They didn't exist. Well, I guarantee you that in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have new companies we've never heard of before that are as big as those. That's the significance of this. It's also changing the nature of work. You're hearing that kind of phrase a lot right now. Obviously, for educators that are on secondary side, at least CTE, this is a huge deal. What does that mean? Changing the nature of work. Well, it just means using AI in the process of doing your job. It may mean that, like the buggy whip, make you're out of business, but it most likely means that you have to be the utilizer. You have to be the one that understands how to utilize this, which is why that is so important. So we need to be teaching those types of things. And also, a lot of things we've been working on and struggling with, much like what we talked about with personalization of education. We've struggled with that in education. It's going to put booster rockets on it. And so we'll see a lot of progress in a lot of human endeavors. When the internet came out, the joke was that, you could be on social media and you could pretend to be a dog. Nobody knows who you are. And anonymity actually then created some problems, I think, we're dealing with today. But with AI, anyone can pretend to be Einstein, was this quote. And I don't know about you, but I want our students to be able to be their own version of Einstein. I want them to be able to have this tool in their pocket, so to speak, so that they can, leverage the God-given talents that they have. Microsoft did a work trends report in the last month. They said every employee needs AI aptitude. And they said, an interesting quote, that the pace of work is outpacing our ability to keep up. And that's one of the things AI is going to be able to do to help us. So there's a link, but I'll tell you the quick look at what the work skills that we're going to have to teach and students are going to have in this next generation of graduates. Many of these things are things we've wanted to teach, are teaching to different degrees. We just may refocus on these more intensively than we have in the past because they've become more important than ever. So as we think about adoption, that happens on something called this curve of adoption. Now, I've got two things kind of layered on top of each other. On the bottom is the adoption rates. When things get adopted, everyone's heard of the early adopters. And then there's the adoption cycle, which is by Gartner called the hype cycle. And when you think about this, ChatGPT is probably at the peak of inflated expectation, as they say. It moves very quickly. This technology acceleration is happening about 3 times faster than anything we've seen in the past, typically every 18 months since the 50s. Technology ability has doubled. The number of transistors in a chip or the number of capabilities that can be done doubled every 18 months. It's happening now every 6 months. So we're moving through this relatively quickly, and we should see some really useful things that we would want to adopt very soon. And here's the truth. This is the worst AI you're ever going to use. It's going to continue to get better. So let me give you 2 great examples. First of all, if you're familiar with Khan Academy announced about a month and a half ago something called Khanmigo, this little fellow right here, who is a virtual assistant to their students. And even when it's asked frank answers, like, just give me the answer, it will walk students through, just like a good tutor would, what they need to know. And of course, the focus of this is resolving the 2 sigma problem that Bloom proposed many, many years ago. And if you think about that, it says that you needed 2 things in order to achieve great results: mentoring one-to-one and mastery learning by the mentor. So now we have AI tools already available, and Harvard study in 2014 kind of doubled down on that being true. So this one-to-one mentorship idea is what this is allowing us to provide, to your point earlier, David. And so you look at, whatever you put into this tool, this in the dark is the student asking the question, right? My code isn't working. What's wrong? Here's the code. Okay, you're almost there. Here's what you need to think about. I mean, just like when I was tutoring students, or you were, you're trying to restate the question, you're trying to go through the process of understanding with them. To your point, they're kind of leveling that playing field. And it's true in all areas, not just math or coding. Sorry about the bad image here. English language arts, let's write a book. Tell me about the character. All right, this is the first step in writing this. And then finally, here's a question students are going through, a social studies question. And in each case, the AI tutor called Conmigo is working with that student with mastery learning, trying to get them to the next step in the learning process. So they're not going through question 53 out of 59 when they didn't even get the first 10 right. They're kind of being coached immediately. And of course, this is a product that you buy from the Khan Academy, but this is just the beginning. Looking at productivity tools, Microsoft announced Copilot, which is an amazing tool that they're going to be putting into into Microsoft Office. So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote. It writes for you, it edits for you. It creates spreadsheets for you. All the formulas are there based on what you told it. So what's that mean? It means you have to ask really good questions, give really clear direction. And if you do that, it will do amazing things. So in this case, it's going to go ahead and combine two Office product files, and then it's going to generate a draft. Boom. Just like that. Tables, everything generated for you. Microsoft is going to release this in the next year. It will change how we teach many of our business classes, I'm sure.
So Pete, like our keynote speaker for our opening session at next year's National Conference on Education in San Diego talks a lot about how important it is for us as educators to be teaching our students how to be input engineers. And I love that phrase because I think that that's really what it's all about, right? We have to know what to input to provide the results that we really want. Is that consistent with what you're talking about?
Absolutely. And I see Joseph now nodding his head as well. Prompt engineering is what it's often called in the business. I like that idea of input engineers. Knowing how to ask the question, what are the details that need to be in that question? That's critical to getting the result that you're looking for. And as people learn that, they'll be able to leverage the tool more and more. Absolutely. So just wrapping it up then, our lessons so far, we need to embrace it. Think about it as an assistant. Prompt engineering is a key skill, and we're going to have to shift curriculum. That's up to each school district in terms of what exactly that means, but be on the lookout for how that's going to need to change. We've got a number of ethical issues, and I'm going to go into some of the bigger kind of issues here in a second. But cheating obviously is one. What's it mean to go without it? That's a digital equity question. And then, there's going to be some societal change. And I guess my encouragement here is maybe with digital citizenship, we miss the opportunity to talk as well as we should have about social networks. And it's created a society. I don't take all the blame, but I take some of it. We have a society that is out of control on social. We have an opportunity to do a good job with this. And I think that's the challenge to us. So the U.S. Department of Education recently put out a report. They're going to have a webinar in 2 weeks. Encourage you to do that. Once you get this information, you can do the registration. When we talk about the existential risks of AI, just yesterday, we had all the well-known experts in AI sign a statement. This is it. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI. Oh my gosh. Should be a global priority alongside with other societal scale risks such as pandemics and nuclear war. So they're just saying it's up there with these things. We need to put some guardrails in place. I don't know what our role is as educators, but it's something to be aware of because your community will be talking about that. There is monitoring of AI's threats to the human civilization that kind of are on the level of climate change, nuclear winter, things like that. They think that's a couple of decades away. Some say as soon as 5 years, but they tend to be outliers. But there is this concern that we have, and it's real. And it's a great opportunity for conversation because maybe some of our students will be able to solve this in the future. You might have seen the recent Senate hearings, what was it, a week ago or so, where OpenAI, the company that created ChatGPT, urged regulation multiple times. I watched the whole thing and it was unmistakable. IBM was there as well as a professor, and they all said the same thing. So there's going to be a creation of an independent commission. They're thinking about a U.S. AI agency, much like we have the Federal Trade Commission, the FCC, the FCC, and others. And because all these companies reside in the United States, we have an obligation to lead this. So I do think regulation is ahead for us. At a recent summit, there was some best case scenarios, and I think this falls along with what we've talked about here in the last few minutes. So Microsoft has a plan for how to do governance, but here's our advice as CoSN. What's your district position? You should have one. How do you support students and teachers? You should have that plan. We need to think about data privacy and security. We need to be teaching ethics and etiquette and thinking about what opportunities lie ahead. So when I think about your district policies and guidelines, think about your social media policies. What are the related administrative guidelines? You probably don't want a board policy because that's a little sticky and doesn't change too quick, right? So think about this in terms of admin guidelines. And board policy should be at a high level is what we'd say. And here's the biggest thing, model use yourself. There's a bunch of excellent products out there. This is speeding up, not slowing down. Try some of these out more than just ChatGPT, and you'll be amazed. And I think your eyes will be opened as to what the possibilities are. Thanks.
Thanks, Pete. I was talking to somebody who was working on their doctorate last week, and he said his chapter 2 and chapter 3 became much easier with the use of ChatGPT. And I said, that's so unfair to those of us that had to do our research all on our own. But I said, you better go through and make sure it's all accurate and correct, because that's something that you're going to get hammered on if you're not. So
right.
Thank you. I thought that was really, really great. Pete, really appreciated it. And I apologize for jumping in a couple of times, but I so geek out over this stuff. I just can't help myself sometimes.
I know you do.
If I just throw that out there, I'm probably going to interrupt you a little bit too. So I apologize in advance. But now let's pivot and learn from Joseph Self, who is the Chief Learning Officer from ISTE. He's the former director of the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Education, and I'm super interested in learning from him. So Joseph, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Let me just get my screen up. We good? Yep. All right. So I'm really excited to be here. By the way, that's one of the best overviews of generative AI that I've heard. So you were lucky to have come today and listened to Pete. That was fantastic. So I hope that you listen closely and learn a ton. I have a few things to add. I'll be sort of flying at a maybe slightly closer to the ground than Pete was. But so let me first just mention a little bit about ISTE. If you're not familiar with the ISTE, I'll just take 1 minute. We're the International Society for Technology and Education. We work with schools and districts to solve tough problems using technology and really focused on pedagogy. We're the learning first, technology second ed tech organization. And we've always been really interested in the transformative use of technology for learning. And you've probably heard of the ISTE standards. They've been adopted by every state throughout the country. And in June, coming right up, we're having our annual conference in Philadelphia. So we hope to see some of you there. And so I'm Joseph South. I'm the Chief Learning Officer at ISTE, and I'm responsible for our AI Explorations for Educator initiative. This is something that we started with General Motors almost 5 years ago now, when we really wanted to take an approach to AI that was thoughtful, that was anticipating its sort of advent into our world. And it was really fascinating because General Motors came to us and they said, we have a problem. We are making cars, and we already know that we're going to need more AI designers than will ever exist in any projection of the future. Can you help us prepare future AI designers? And I love that they framed it that way, because we want young people to be empowered, not just to understand AI, but to design AI, because they are the designers of the future. So ISTE's point of view on this is that given that every student is an AI consumer, and this cannot be overstated, almost everything that we see or hear has been touched by AI. And I'm not just talking about the digital world, but also the physical world. Which products sit at the end of the supermarket aisle? That was decided by AI. Which signage is being put in front of you, determined by AI. What the billboards look like as you drive along the highway, a whole bunch of those designed with AI. It's everywhere. It's sort of the microplastics of media. You cannot escape AI in your world. And so given that every student is an AI consumer and that AI is invisible to them, and given that AI is limited by the values and biases and experiences of its creators, we want to take a stand about what needs to happen. We believe that educators need to know the basics of AI. I know that's a bold statement because a lot of educators are going to say, I don't teach computer science. I'm not a STEM teacher. This is not really my area. But when something is this pervasive, it's a duty, especially for those of us who are responsible for shaping and allowing young minds to thrive, that we understand something that this is pervasive. And, I don't want to always make negative comparisons, but, if AI, if it was a pollutant in the air, we'd be talking about it. And it's not necessarily a pollutant, but it's something that is so ubiquitous that we need to understand at a basic level. Second, educators need to make AI visible to students so they can become savvy consumers of it. It's inescapable. We will not escape AI. We have not escaped AI. We do not escape AI. It's part of our lives. But as it becomes visible to us, if we're aware of it, then we can make better choices about how to consume it. And then we need to prepare students to become AI designers, because they literally are the people who are going to shape the future of AI. It's not very likely that I'm going to shift careers to be an AI designer, but it's highly likely that my students will be designing AI and they will absolutely be using it professionally. And because AI is limited by the biases that are inherent in it, the more diverse the participants, the better chance we have of creating AI that is less biased than it might otherwise be. So I want to give you a little sense of what we're doing at ISTE. I've got about a 1 minute, 30-second video, and then I'll talk through some of the ways we've been engaging educators in the work.
Well, at one point, AI was in the distant future. Well, that future is now. As educators, we need to prepare our students to interact with AI in safe, thoughtful, intelligent ways. Most of the time, when people hear artificial intelligence, especially a teacher, you are a little intimidated. But after going through the AI Explorations course, I gained way more confidence.
AI Explorations provides a variety of free resources and opportunities for educators. Everything from our online PD course to our hands-on AI project guides, as well as a webinar series and an online PLN community.
The AI hands-on guide and the ISTE course that I took about artificial intelligence really gave me everything I needed to teach my 5th grade class about artificial intelligence.
I'm really inspired by the fact that they're able to grasp onto these concepts. And I've even had some students realize I could be that person to create something using artificial intelligence.
I think learning about AI with Ms. Wright is really fun. How I hope to be involved with AI in the future is that I might maybe later make a robot that can pick up trash or help the environment.
So I really love the way that video ends with that student talking about how they can really engage this process and create a robot that could pick up trash. So already students are starting to see how they fit. So we have this course, we've provided it to over 2,000 educators. It teaches them the basics of AI, it teaches them how to teach about AI, and most importantly, it teaches them about helping young people become AI designers. We also have absolutely free, open source, no charge, 5 hands-on AI project guides for the classroom. And as you can see, this covers elementary, secondary, even electives. Teachers can do activities that teach students about AI. And then we have one guide specifically focused on computer science teachers and one on ethics. So go to ISTE.org/AI. These are in English, Arabic, and Spanish. And a lot of these are hands-on. They're not, if you go through the guide, you'll see that they're not all digital activities. There's a lot that students need to understand about pattern recognition and how sensors work and what AI can see and can't see, that can all be taught with manipulatives, with physical things rather than digital things. ISTE is also part of an international movement called Teach AI. This is being led by ISTE, Code.org, ETS, Khan Academy, and the World Economic Forum. And we've really joined together to look globally at where this is all heading. And so we felt like the educator voice was getting a little lost in some of these conversations. And so we wanted to bring that to the fore. So Teach AI is focused on policy recommendations at every level for using AI safely. We also will be updating the K-12 CS framework for curriculum in K-12 to incorporate teaching about AI and teaching using AI. And then we're also really interested in public engagement. This needs to be a conversation. Nobody has all the answers, nobody. And when you have a CEO of a giant company saying, please regulate me, you know you're in a place where people do not have all the answers. And then of course we want to really focus on the ethics and safety of the technology. I did want to just address one of the questions I saw in the chat. I know we're going to get to all of them, but I've been thinking about it ever since it was asked. I think this is by Tom Leitz. And I hope I'm not stealing their thunder, Dave, but says, as you discuss augmenting versus disrupting and AI becoming a great disruptor, if cost was not an issue, how would you want to see AI leveraged to create true disruption to change the way we think about pedagogy? So one thing that really comes to mind on that question is, we know that the more relevant we can make our teaching experiences to the lives and interests of students, the more engaged they'll be. However, we have 30 students in a classroom, and we just can't personalize to that degree. Even if you can personalize to their level of expertise or knowledge or understanding about a topic, whether they love soccer or plushies or want to be a biologist or a basketball player, it just doesn't enter into the equation. Well, with AI, that can. You could actually create a curriculum approach where students bring their interests to the classroom, and the instruction is then automatically customized to problems and dilemmas and opportunities in their areas of interest. And it can just really, in the future, I imagine that, my son is obsessed with wolf conservation. There is no reason that he couldn't be learning about statistics and algebra and writing, all from that point of view, with the help of something like an AI tool. And that's just one idea. There's many, many more. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave for questions.
Yeah, no, Joseph, I just want to add on to that because I think that's super important. And we think about, many teachers across this country are really stretched super thin right now through COVID, coming out of COVID. And as I think about how we might be able to use generative AI to create a different level of stress load on our staff, I think there's something there that we should embrace, and I think about English teachers and having to grade, 135, 140 papers multiple times a year. And I think about, if editing and inputting are the crucial skills and dispositions that our kids are going to need to learn, why are our teachers with their proverbial red pen being the initial editors, and so I think there's some huge potential there if we're willing to step back and recalibrate those instructional practices, and then I saw something, I don't know, it was probably 2 months ago now, an example where a speaker got up, put into ChatGPT and opened it up and then asked the special ed teacher, don't tell me the name of a student, but tell me their strengths, areas for growth, and just anything that you would consider to be part of an IEP, and typed everything in as she talked, and then hit a button and it created an IEP, and then said to that case manager, compare this to what you all put together. And she said, it's better than what we put together. And I think about the hundreds of hours of time that goes into an IEP and a case study in a time when we have such a teacher shortage that could allow our staff to spend more time with our kids. I think there's a real opportunity there if we allow ourselves to explore it. Any reaction to that, Joseph?
So completely agree. And it's a great insight. And there's a couple ways that I think about it. So one, if you think of generative AI as everybody's first draft of everything tool, right? This is your first draft tool. Whatever you're trying to accomplish, it's your first draft. I was writing a grant. I was turning in an RFP, and I was super frustrated because they wanted a wet signature on it, which seems really old school. And so I just went over to ChatGPT and I'm like, write a super nice letter to a very rich funder, convincing them that I don't need to use a wet signature anymore. And it wrote the most beautiful letter citing, and I checked to make sure it was real, a federal law saying that, electronic signatures are in fact equivalent to wet signatures, which I never would have found on my own.
Right.
And okay, the letter wasn't perfect, but it was a beautiful first draft. And when you talk about teacher productivity, oh my goodness, imagine that they're trying to create, I've done this. You can type this in the chat GPT, create a 4-station lesson on photosynthesis at the 7th grade level that utilizes Chromebooks and physical manipulatives. And it will put out for you the most beautiful first draft of a 4-stage lesson. And then you can say, make it fit in 40 minutes. And it will tell you how many minutes to spend on each step. Again, not perfect, but an amazing first draft. And so teachers can save amazing amounts of time. One more example is I just can't resist. Sometimes teachers find patterns in students' writing. And ultimately, AI will do that for them. But when they do find a pattern, they can say, generate 20 sentences with this particular error in it, and then the correction, and then an explanation of why they were incorrect. Seconds, they've got that. Now they have something that they can hand over to a student to address that need. And it literally took them seconds to produce.
Yep. That's great. Pete, I'm going to ask you for your feedback and comments on that question too, but your last statement reminded me of a comic strip I saw about 6 weeks ago. And it was one guy, a high school friend, talking to another high school friend saying, hey, I used ChatGPT for my history report. What do you think? You think I'm going to get away with it? And his friend said, no way, that's way too good. There is no way the teacher is going to believe you actually did that.
Yes, and unfortunately, you can say, make it sound like a B- sophomore in high school, and it'll write you another version.
That's right. Pete, any reaction to those comments or thoughts?
I think that the point Joseph is making is right on. The first draft for everything, the place to start everything. I think that what we do as humans then is we add our own voice, right? I mean, the AI is not going to do that for us, and shouldn't. I'll just say that. I won't ask it to. Maybe there's one point in time when that we'll be able to, but I think that's where we have to take control. And that's part of the conversation, I think, into the future is, what is the role of AI and what is the role of the human? And this should be used, foundationally to create the models. And we as educators should be having voice into that. I hope that we'll be listened to. But I 100% agree that this is, and it's to the point I was saying at the end of the presentation I was giving, like, check some of those other products out. We're all familiar with ChatGPT. Check out some of these other ones. I don't know about you, but sometimes I would have to read through contracts, like for software agreements. Oh my God, want to fall asleep? Do that. But there's a tool out there that will let you read an entire PDF and you can just ask questions of it. And you can say, what does this say? 85, 90, 150 pages. What does this say about student data privacy? Boom, the answer. What does this say about, the terms of use? Boom, there's the answer. Now, I could maybe get to that by Googling the PDF, if you will, doing the search, but I don't get a specific answer. So that's a great tool that's out there today. There's a lot of cool tools that not only generate things, but help you to do your job better. And kind of getting back to what your primary question was, David. Yeah, think about all the research we've seen over the last 20 years. 7% to 25% of a teacher's day is administrative tasks. That if we could offload just 10% of that, like, it doesn't have to be 100% because some of that's standing in front of the restroom, right? During passing period. But if we could offload like 10% of that, that can be used very effectively by those teachers to better impact instruction.
That's great. One of the questions that came in is, are there concerns or should there be concerns for individuals using generative AI as it relates to copyright? Either of you have a perspective on that?
Yes.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Yes, there should be concerns. So, this is early days, and I'm sure Pete's reading as fast as I am on it. That large language model is essentially the sum of whatever was put into it, and that can include anything that was publicly available. And some of the stuff that gets in there, is a little controversial whether it should have gotten in there. But once it's in, it's in. You can get it back out, but it's tricky. And one big source of AI modeling is Reddit, because it's great examples of human speech on specific topics. And they just decided to start to charge for people who want to use Reddit to train AI engines. So that's like the first example. But in particular, artists have been very, very disturbed that they've created a distinctive style. It's taken them years. It sets them apart in the market. AI can copy that in minutes and generate new works that are essentially indistinguishable from their style that they've worked so hard on. And that, puts them out of a job. And so there's a lot of concern about this.
Well, and to that point, these tools do not tell you where the information is from. So citing your results comes down to, ChatGPT. I asked this question, they're getting better at that. I think Microsoft is leading a little bit in this, and I hope Google will be there right there too, in terms of providing where some of the information came from. But citations are just about impossible right now in terms of anything accurate, because we use those citations for a purpose, and so that purpose isn't being met the way things are right now. But the other piece of that, I think, also is how we think about plagiarism. I've read plagiarism definitions, and they are no longer adequate because they say it's copying the work of another individual. Well, like maybe that's not true, and students can get by with that. So I think there's a lot of good questions that like this that we need to be having conversations on and making changes to accommodate.
One of the other questions, Joseph, that came in was asking whether ISTE has any resources for higher ed, or if it's primarily focused on K-12.
So we are working on higher ed resources right now. We are running, we have our first set of higher ed faculty who are working through our AI for Educators course, customizing it for a higher ed audience. So this actually hasn't been announced yet, so I guess you're hearing it for the first time. So we're hoping in a few months to have higher ed specific resources.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's very exciting. And Daryl, to your question, I've asked our ASA team just to check on the being able to copy and paste, and we will send out with a copy of the recording all the resources that we're providing as well. So you'll be able to get them in an email. So thank you for that. So we just have a few minutes left. Pete, what's your words of advice to school district leaders as it relates to generative AI that is going to make sure that they sign up and come to our next 2 webinars and go to the COSIN annual conference, which is always amazing, go to ISTE's annual conference, which is always amazing, and of course have everybody come to San Diego for our national conference next February at ASA. What's your best words of advice?
Here's what I'd say. Don't be left behind. I asked in the chat, I said, what are examples of ways you've used generative AI? Some brilliant examples there that I would love to read. But, our peers are our best collaborators. We need to come together on something we've never thought of before. Where does that happen? That happens at conferences. That happens in forums like this, right? But oftentimes these are too short or too focused. So take advantage of your peers locally and nationally to try to figure these out as it specifically affects your district.
Yeah, I think that's great. Nobody has to do this on their own. Everybody's figuring out, but don't be the one that lets others figure it out for you. I think that's great advice because you're going to leave your kids behind, right? At the end of the day.
100%.
Joseph, how about you? What are your words of advice for people?
I think one way is the way you frame it in your mind can make a big difference. So this is the way I think about it. Originally, we had to learn from experts and we had to go find them. And then we wrote books, and now you get your expert in a book. And then we wrote encyclopedias that indexed all the experts. And now you get your answers in the encyclopedia. And then we had the internet, which now made it instant to access that encyclopedia. And now ChatGPT and other generative AI is the new front end of all that knowledge. And so if you think about it as the new front end and all the other stuff becomes the back end, then you start to think of it as something that is here to stay, that's a really powerful tool, and something that the more you understand, the more powerful it's going to be. And so if you'll think of it as the new front end instead of some crazy wild technology that might make us go extinct, and it might, then I think you'll start to frame it up in ways that you'll start to find really great uses for it in a school.
Well, we have to prepare our kids for a world that doesn't exist and for a world we can't imagine, and a world that's going to transform itself several times over the course of their lifetimes. And so we can't be going back. I mean, I think about, the use of calculators. I think about the teaching of cursive. I think about the big challenge of moving 1-to-1, but then we still had worksheets that we were handing out, right? Like we have to embrace and figure this out to catapult our kids to be successful upon leaving us. And that, at the end of the day, is what we're all about at ASA. We appreciate the partnership with ISTE and with COSIN, along with Digital Promise and Collegiate Edunation, for this 3-part series. But this is the work that we have the honor of doing, my friends. Like, it is a huge responsibility, but it's an honor to be able to prepare our kids and embrace this work. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I really hope you come back on June 7th and June 14th to continue the conversation, and have an awesome either end of your school year or start to your summer, depending on when your graduation ceremonies are.